Okay, as with the other videos, this is a short introduction to the next part of the little lesson on making a whole model. Excuse me. The In this case, it should have been so simple. All we want to do is compute our working capital balance, compute our EBITDA, get our pre-tax IRR, take the depreciation so we can get our taxes, get our EBIT times the tax rate to compute operating taxes with no financing, get after-tax cash flow, get an after-tax IRR. Test all of this stuff out. So you don't need this AND function here. Now, turns out to be a little tiny bit tricky than I said because of the depreciation. And in the depreciation, if you've got multiple assets with construction periods, you can't put a little switch, people call a mask flag, whatever they call what I use them too, so I'm not going to criticize. But we can't use that because we have assets coming in and out with the retirement. And we've got to use plant in service. We can compute the construction work in progress that keeps track of the balance of the capex until you've gotten the construction. And this plant balance has to be only after the construction is finished. That's what you're going to depreciate. So you have to have a kind of a thing that has the net plant in service, not the capex, the plant in service. And that's takes a little bit of time in the video, and that's the rest of it's computing the IRR, a little bit of discussion on IRR. So you can watch this really, really exciting video, the rest of it now. Okay, I was having a problem setting the recording. It seems to be okay. Phew, that was a relief. Oh, you have been happy. No more stupid videos. Now, the next section. Again, this set of videos, I don't want to call it an online course because I'm violently opposed to these kind of online courses. I don't know how much you can get out of it. I had a client who just was trying to go through my videos, and they really tried hard, and it didn't work. Went over there, and we really built a nice model with SPVs, a rooftop model, so you can try the videos, and it might help you a little bit, but I'm not sure. Now, maybe it helps you more. Now, the next step is to just get the after-tax project IRR and the pre-tax project IRR. Now, to do that, we'll just have to get the pre-tax cash flow. That's pretty easy because we have up here and we've set the model and we've structured it hopefully relatively carefully. We put the revenues that we recorded and we subtract out the operating expense that we record. Okay, and there we have it. I should have probably okay, and I didn't open my generic macros yet, which didn't open properly. Sorry about this. What a bad start to this video. I'm going to keep it on. A lot of times I have these bad starts and I just stop things. Okay, now, so we needed to open the generic macros to make do a little of our things, or whatever. The formatting, that's what I meant to say. And then we have our capital expenditures. I added some spaces there accidentally. And then now that the working capital, we should do maybe a little couple up here. Let's put working capital balance. Balance. I meant to just minimize this working capital change. So now the working capital balance will simply, in this case, be our accounts receivable we have up here. minus the accounts payable. And then our change will be this minus this. The issue really in these kind of models with accounts payable, now what I have, by the way, is I put the formulas to automatic except, I put it manual, automatic except, I just put it to manual, excuse me. And then we put I'm yelling at myself, not you. And then we put the EBITDA minus the CapEx minus this, okay? And then we'll compute the IRRs. Now the depreciation, this is a little tricky because what we need to do is if we have these kind of arrays where we put a whole bunch of different projects in and out, we have to do two things. We have to, we don't have to do anything. I've said that a zillion times, but we figure out how much plant goes into service. Now, luckily, this is what I was struggling with before. I thought, well, I didn't have the amount we placed into service. That's not the CapEx. The CapEx can be over a construction period, and the amount we placed in service, I put this here. This was the total capacity that we have at the start of the period. And we put these right at the end of the period, and then the end of the month. I'll get to that in a minute. And then so these are differentiated from the capital expenditures that had a net that had a S-curve in it. Now, I think we also need these subsidies that we put in. The subsidies, let me see, we just put the subsidies at the end of the period, I hope. No, that we did the same thing. So just put down here, we should put net plant in service. Okay. And then we put now this one I computed and I didn't press the F9, so it's okay. Okay, so we have the net plant in service, differentiated from the CapEx. Okay, and so we go down to this one and we put our opening balance and we make that equal to the prior year closing balance. The one thing you really have to know. And then we go up and get the plant in service from our CapEx kind of equation. So you could almost say, well, we should have done this whole depreciation section next to CapEx. That would have been fine. Now the amount removed from plant in service, that's going to be a tricky one. We're going to use the offset function. And here's the thing. Let's look at our assumptions. Now on the assumptions, this time I did to make it a little inconsistent. Inconsistency isn't always bad, I don't think. Okay, I made the depreciation life 15 years, okay, which means that from and then I said, well, the depreciation rate will be 1 divided by the 15, okay, and then we can do our depreciation like this. We could also put a period, and then just below the period we put depreciation rates. And we can say, well, starting in period 1, well, let's put in period 0, you have no depreciation. And then, I don't know what's happening with and then in period 1, oh no, some stupid thing here. And then this is straight line depreciation. Now, this wouldn't be very different if it was this times 12 is when we stop it. Okay, but let's add 1 to that. So in this month we put it back to 0. So this is like a changing depreciation rate. Now the reason I'm doing this is we can model depreciation 2 different ways. One way is just to reflect the retirements happening after 100, in this case 180 periods. The other, if that's straight line, it works fine. But if it's an accelerated depreciation, you have to make one of our famous, things here that you've probably seen in corporate models, all of these kind of things where you go down. But we've done that already. Okay, there would be two ways to do that. We could use our if you watch the immediately earlier video just on operating costs, we would have used that same capacity times rate function and just plug this in as our timing, and this is on our rates, and we could put different rates over time. I'm going to just do a simpler kind of method here. So our when we remove things from the service, I'll put our assumption over here. We take this one and let's multiply that by our famous thing that we know there are 12 months in a year. I hope you're smart enough to realize that. You could get fancy and somewhere in your model put the number of months in the year, because that might change, I don't think it really will. Now the problem is, what we'll do is go backwards 180 periods from this. So what you do is you put offset and you go up to the plant placed in service, and then you keep it on the same row. That's what this 0 does. It keeps it on the same row. And then you put a minus on this one, okay, and it goes back 180 periods. And when you go back 180 periods from here, it's way off the sheet. And how will Excel know what happened 180 periods ago? So it gives you a reference. And our closing balance is this one. Now, this is what we just have to do here is put an if statement and make sure that this period is greater than or equal to this period, and we press F4 a couple of times here. Then we get a false. Now, if you don't like this false, you just multiply it by 1. Okay? Okay, so what we did here is we just left the false thing out of the, the if statements, which is totally fine. Okay? And then we put the depreciation rate here, and let's get that from our assumptions and divide that by 12. Okay, and we take this depreciation rate and multiply it by the opening balance, not the closing balance. That assumes that the plant in service goes into service at the end of the month, which is pretty good. I should have just maybe put this, we should have, I put it in a different line. Okay, and that means we can again remember the calculations are set to manual, so we can take our EBITDA and subtract our depreciation. And what will happen here, by the way, is what will maybe I should we can calculate. Okay. And oh shit, just a minute. I didn't swear. Okay, I turned out I took a very long break instead of just switching off the computer. Now, when you have this kind of model, if you want to check things are reasonable, I suggest doing something here. Okay, I suggest going, and now we have, here how many contacts you made. Here's the percentage of people that are interested in, maybe. It's just a silly kind of assumption. And then we multiply those together. And then we say, well, what percentage of the people who are interested actually close a deal? And then you take this and allocate it between the three kinds of contracts, and then you have the amounts. Okay, now And that's what we start with, and we don't add anything in the future. Here we can add stuff in the future and a little bit later just by increasing the size of the portfolio, but let's start with just nothing. And then you can go even further, and I suggest you do this by just temporarily zeroing out, everything, and maybe just saying, okay, all we have is one facility of 1.5 kW. That's all we have. And let's make sure the model works there and has a reasonable result there. So in that case, we have some negative cash flow. If we can kind of walk through everything and just make sure, well, we have the beginning of the installation, and then when we start our one installation, and then we have 1.5 kW, and then we get the capacity, and then we get the generation, and then we go down and get the figure out how much the capital expenditures for that are, and make sure everything looks all nice and reasonable, and then we go down and make sure our revenues are okay. I had a mistake there that whatever I fixed. It's described in the revenue section, and then the O&M, which has the checks in it, and we finally have the working capital, and then we can get our pre-tax IRR. Now here's what kind of I go crazy about. This is not what I go crazy about. If you just compute the IRR, oops, we get a 0, but that's just, I hope. Oh, it took a minute to calculate. Now that's, if you have just a monthly model, don't use this XIRR. Do it the old-fashioned way. Well, you can use the XIRR, but take it 1 plus the IRR, raise it to the 12th power, and subtract 1. It's just, I think, a little better. And then see if you have anything that's approaching a reasonable number, which I think that's high for these days, but it's not unreasonable. If this was way too high, the natural question to ask would be, why doesn't somebody else come in and offer a bigger discount to get these rooftops? Or well, that's the biggest question. Or why haven't people been doing this already if it's completely out of line, okay? And then if this is reasonable, then you can say, okay, well, let's put another one in. Just one single facility of 3 and 5 kilowatts. And now we get a little bit higher, and you might say, well, is this very real? Is this very real for the other kind of facilities? Okay. Now, we started going through this depreciation, and when we went through this depreciation, you recall we used the plant in service from 128. If you press Control and the open square bracket, you can kind of go to it, and then you press F5 and you go back. I don't know why the advantage of some of these other tools really compared to this. This is, if you can do this, it's pretty much. And then we used the offset command, remember, to go across, and then we had a straight line depreciation. Okay, now the next thing, we better compute the accumulated depreciation, which we take the prior period and just add the depreciation expense. That seems all just fine. And then we can compute the net plant, which is the closing balance of the plant in service, not the total plant you have in the balance sheet. Be really careful, because there's going to be construction work in progress on this one, okay? And we go across, and we have a negative number. Oh, no! And we can even put a little test here to make sure this plant is always greater than or equal. Whoops, that was supposed to be a greater than or equal to 0. Or we can put minus 0.1 or something to make sure that, we have some problems. And then we can put an and here. That's just like putting a product thing together. I've talked about that very often. Okay, it's calculating. Give it a minute, and that's false. Now, the reason it's false is if you have some retirements, they have to be subtracted from the plant in service. So we have a kind of a little more sophisticated depreciation discussion on this one. And then you copy that across. And now we get a true. I don't really have to check it. That was the whole business of putting the true. I guess I'll go down and check it anyway. I mean, that's kind of stupid. But there, it goes to 0 right at the end. Okay, so that's kind of, I'm saying kind of a lot too much here. Then we can take the EBITDA minus the depreciation to get our EBIT. And when we put our taxes in, let's get our assumption about the tax rate. Again, that came from this assumption, and then we just better F4 that times the EBIT. Okay, so we have the taxes finished, and now we can take the pre-tax cash flow and subtract the taxes. That gives us our famous, if you want to talk about free cash flow to the firm or something like that, that's what it is. I'm making a whole lot of underlines in this. Perhaps I'm overdoing it just a little bit. And then the same thing, put a IRR. This gives you the monthly IRRs. You don't have to worry about this silly bug in Excel where you have to put kind of that 0 in right up first. Now the question is, which is better to look at, the after-tax or the pre-tax IRR? Well, I would say this one is what you compare to the interest rate without any tax effects, and this one is the one you compare to the interest rate after you've accounted for the fact that there's an interest deduction. So the effective after-tax interest cost is lower than this, okay? And that's kind of the first part of our model. So we've gone through all of the first, just our portfolio, then our production, then our capex, then our revenues, then our operating costs, and then our depreciation and our pre-tax and after-tax cash flow. And that's a key part of the structure of the model. Excuse me, so I'm going to stop the video.